When I was in college, I look back, I was totally oblivious to everything. It was unbelievable how, I don't know, dumb, like what a dumb kid I was. Academically, pretty good. As far as the world and what's going on, yeah, it was on television, but that's not going to be me because I'm going to be in the Navy, that kind of attitude.
So your assumption was that going in the Navy would be your path to not getting involved in Vietnam.
Oh, yeah. I'd be on a ship, I'd see the world and, get out and I'd have a GI Bill and go back to school. That was the plan.
So your first duty related to, so that doesn't pan out. You actually have two different forms of duty associated with Vietnam.
Yeah.
Your first was associated with PIRAZ,
Yep.
Positive Identification Radar Advisory Zone. So what was that? Basically what was that
So
about? What was
in,
PIRAZ?
in the Gulf in Vietnam, they had the carrier group, which was Yankee Station, which was farther out in the Gulf of Tonkin.
Right.
And then between that carrier and the land, there were SAR ships with search and rescue ships, destroyers usually. And then they had a PIRAZ station. And that PIRAZ station was off the coast up north near Hanoi. And it was the primary purpose of it was to give the pilots coming off the carrier early warning if say some MiGs came up or whatever, when they were going for an airstrike. And also as a beacon, we had a very small area we had to stay in because we were at that time I think they had Loran. Well, I wasn't involved with it, but I think we were a Loran station, so they could use us to navigate out. That they wouldn't have to help them get back to the carrier.
Oh, you mean the planes could tap into that system and that would help them
Yeah,
get back
they
to
would home in on us to get off, when they came feet wet, which is when they came over the water. And then from where we were, they knew exactly what course to take to get to the carrier.
what ship were you on?
William H. Stanley was a
And what
deal at that time.
okay, the William H.
So,
Stanley. And when do you arrive? Do you remember when you were in the northern South China Sea, Tonkin Gulf on in
yeah,
Park?
um, so I joined the Stanley. It was in the yard at being converted for PIRAZ at in Charleston. It was home ported in Mayport. So we went around and went through the Panama Canal. We stopped in Hawaii for a week, and then we went over. And I think it was just maybe December of 68, November, December of 68. It was in that time frame there. Yeah.
How long were you out there as part of this PIRAZ mission?
Well, we'd go out for on the line for like anywhere from 30 to 45 days. And then we'd come back for a week and we either go to, Subic Bay or Japan, or we went to Hong Kong one time and we go back. And then we came back in the end of 16, the middle of the summer of 69, I think we came back. Like maybe June, thinking maybe June we came back.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about you actually move into a very different line of work. But
Yeah.
when you're on the ship, as part of the PIRAZ mission, what was your specific job?
Air search radar. So when we went on the line, we went to modified battle stations. So we were 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And I had the day shift, which was 0600 to 1800, 12, You weren't on the radar for 12 hours. They gave you breaks and they rotate you around. But that was my primary mission, is to identify aircraft if they came up.
And you
Like,
mentioned, keeping an eye out for MiGs. Did you ever actually have
oh
any
yeah,
MiGs? You
yeah.
did.
In fact, we also could identify them. They had MiG-17s and MiG-21s, and they gave up different emissions, and you could tell when they were coming up. In fact, you could tell before they were coming up. Because something that area was kind of mountainous, and until they got up a couple thousand feet, you wouldn't actually catch them on the radar. But you could tell by the emissions that they were alive and they were coming up.
This is a part of the war that if I've heard about it before, very, very little. The use of MiGs coming from North Vietnam. What do you remember about what these MiGs were up to coming from North Vietnam?
Well, it depends what they thought was coming. So obviously they could see that the aircraft were coming. So if they thought like A6s were coming, which was the ground attack aircraft, the ones that did the bombing, they would probably just wait for and use missiles because they were fairly low altitude. If they thought F4s were coming, then they would probably send up some MiGs to try to, not all the time, but sometimes that they would do that, and try to battle with the MiGs, with the F4s rather.
Were you aware of instances where MiGs and F4s
Oh yeah,
got
yeah,
into combat?
yeah.
And could you see that on your radar?
Well, you could see it. It wasn't well defined, but you knew that they were getting mixed up. You know. You know.
And on the radar screen,
Mhm.
were you able to see if one of the MiGs was hit and went down, or one of the MiGs or the other planes was hit and went down? Were
Well,
you
you
able
could see the radar trace disappear, uh, and you can see obviously, you get an altitude report on it. This is all. This is different than regular radar. So I went to radar A school. What you had was a sweep, and you had a grease pen, and you marked it, and then you had to do calculations for course and speed and relative to your ship, and it was all manual. This was computerized, where you would track the target with a cursor, and the computer would do the calculation and tell you the course and speed and altitude, and that would
and
all
you
be like a readout, almost like an air controller sees today,
sure.
that kind of thing, you know.
And you're reporting, and the officer where you are is getting this information and then passing it to the captain?
Actually, I think it was all automated because as soon as we got a paint, in other words, as soon as we got a paint, the F4 seemed to know about it right away. So there must have been some, you know, complementary equipment on the F4 where they could see that.
So were there instances then where you could see you've got two blips and one's an F4, the other's
We didn't
identified?
get two blips; you had a lot of blips.
Okay, so you've got a lot of blips
Yeah,
and
because the F4s always went, everybody went with the wingman.
okay.
So, and then if they brought up like if there were four sections, you'd have eight F4s, and you might have a dozen F6s, A6s rather. And then MiGs, they might bring up 10, 5, 10, whatever. So it was a lot more crowded than that.
So on your screen, I mean, did you actually see air battle then play out? I mean, on
Well,
your
you
screen?
don't see an air battle, but you see the traces,
Right.
you
So
know,
the
you knew
radars,
something was going on. They were in close
yeah.
proximity, and they weren't on a
Right.
constant course. They were, moving around in
And
altitude.
after time, you're able to, you've learned to interpret what you see, that now there's one less MiG.
Yeah. Well, see, you don't know if the MiG went down intentionally or unintentionally. You don't see that. You just
Right.
know it's not there anymore.
So you're seeing on your radar screen, you obviously can't see details. You don't have video of what's happening, so you just have a
Right.
radar screen representation of what's happening. Um, but you can tell that there's, contact between US planes and these MiGs. Um, as you think back on that time, in your own mind, I don't know, I don't really know how to formulate the question. I mean, you know, what was going on in your own mind as you're watching this? I mean, you're aware that air battle is going on, plane to plane fighting is going on. Is it just something you're witnessing that's,
No, no, no.
what's
Because
going on in your own mind?
yeah, especially the first few times, um, you know, you're on the radar, and you've been a radarman for a while, and it's kind of routine. But when there's actual people in the air that you're responsible for providing information, otherwise they could die, it was stressful. You didn't want to miss anything. You were glued to that scope.
Mm.
Any little slight, even if it looked like a blip, you'd mark it, and because if you messed up, somebody could get killed, and there was a lot of stress doing that. You
So
know,
is
a sense
your
of responsibility.
so is the information that you're getting as you're looking at the radar screen, is that's being relayed immediately to the planes?
It was all computerized. We didn't radio the planes. We didn't. I don't
Right.
think, not that I'm aware of.
Wow.
They did radio the planes. Sometimes the planes would do a flyby when they were coming back. Sometimes they want to see who we were, and they'd come down. and do a low flyby. And some of the guys would be able to go out and look. One of the things that impressed me is how big those F4s were. I thought they were little fighter plane. Those things were monsters. They're gigantic airplanes. And if they flew by like within about 300 feet, it looked like, like they were half the length of the ship. They were really big. But anyway, that's about the only time I think that we had any kind of radio contact with them.
Wow. Did you, was there an occasion when, again, you're just watching this on the screen, it's not video, you've just got blips that you're following, but, was there an occasion where okay, these blips, these are the American planes, and you can tell by what happened that one of those American planes had been lost in one way or another?
I'm not aware of any F4s that were lost, at least that I'm aware of. There were one A6. In other words, the number of planes that came back was one short, and it looked like it was probably an A6, but you didn't really know because nobody told you anything. You just happened to notice that, hey, we got an odd number of planes. That's not right. You know.
So now you will go on and to do very, very different duty. And we'll talk about
Yeah.
that. But if this was your Vietnam War service, just this, if this was,
Mhm.
the totality of your Vietnam service, what would your perspective on the Vietnam War be? In other words, from the perspective of that young radarman,
Mhm.
as part of this PIRAZ program, what did the Vietnam War look like from where you were?
It looked like we were winning. I was really, proud to be part of that. I was, loyal American. You can even say I was somewhat gung ho. When I went became an advisor, that all changed. When I came back from Vietnam, I was an angry person. I was bitter. I was very cynical. It completely changed me. Completely changed my life.
So what comes to mind is, radar, it's in a way, it's kind of the view from 10,000 feet, right? You've got this
That's
very
right.
general view, but I want to ask you why you thought you're winning. But then, to jump ahead just for a second, at the advisory level, you're seeing things at the ground level and the complications on the ground. So I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to hearing about that. What was it that you saw that made you feel like we're winning?
But we except for that one A6, I think that's the only plane I ever saw we got lost. I know that a lot of MiG, particularly the MiG 21s, MiG 17s were very maneuverable, and I guess they were more of a hazard to. And they also had machine guns, which I think was more of a hazard to an F4. A F4 against the MiG 21, the F4 I think had a big advantage. In fact, they wouldn't even close that close in the F4 to be firing missiles.
Wow.
So, I think they had a big advantage. Plus, at that time in the war, I guess early in the war there was problems. I found that out after, but they had been through like Top Gun school, and these guys were really sharp. These pilots were good.